Gyeongju, a city that holds 1,000 years of history. The cherished values preserved over time have shaped who we are today. Now, through new encounters, we step into a better future. Sustainability, innovation. With the spirit of connection, a new millennium story begins as APEC and Gyeongju come together. APEC meets Gyeongju.
In our headlines on this Tuesday, November 18th, here in South Korea, President Lee Jae-myung sits down for a summit meeting with UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan on this Tuesday in Abu Dhabi, covering advanced technology, defense and energy. Meanwhile, North Korea strongly condemns the recently disclosed joint fact sheet between South Korea and the U.S., claiming it shares a confrontational stance toward the Northern regime. And South Korea's household debt growth slows in the third quarter amid stricter lending regulations, but the total debt pile continues to inch closer to the 2 quadrillion won mark. We start our newscast today over in Abu Dhabi, where President Lee Jae-myung is engaged in talks with his UAE counterpart Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. For details, I have my colleague Yoon Jung-min standing by live on the ground. Jung-min, welcome. So what has been shared about this summit meeting?
Sunny, so the talks between the two presidents are underway as we speak. It began with an official welcoming ceremony here at the UAE's presidential palace for the South Korean leader who's visiting the country for a state visit. President Lee Jae-myung was greeted by the UAE's President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan and a group of children. They also inspected an honor guard and gun salutes were fired. The leaders will be holding talks, which will be then followed by expanded talks and the signing of MOUs. Cooperation on AI, the defense industry, nuclear energy, and culture will top the summit agenda. The UAE is the only country in the Middle East to have established a special strategic partnership with Korea, and the region is deemed crucial for South Korea's exports of key items. Later, the leaders will have a luncheon. I should note that streets here are fully prepared to welcome the South Korean leader, having installed flags of the two countries side by side along the streets, around the presidential palace, and the airport. Some of the iconic places in Abu Dhabi, including ADNOC headquarters, were lit up in the colors of Korea's Taegukgi flag.
Right, a warm welcome indeed. Now, ahead of his talks with his UAE counterpart, I hear President Lee spoke to a local daily there, Jung-min. What was the gist of his message?
That's right, Sunny. So bolstering cooperation with the Arab nation was largely front and center. In an earlier interview with a local newspaper, Al Ittihad, the Korean president said the summit will lay the foundation for a new centennial phase in the relations between the two nations. He stressed cooperation on AI semiconductors, renewable energy, as well as small modular reactors, building upon the success of Baraka's construction and operation. South Korea also plans to establish a new Korean center in the UAE by 2030 for more active cultural exchange and trade between the two countries. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Jung-min, thank you for the latest from Abu Dhabi, the first leg of the president's 10-day 4-nation tour of the Middle East and Africa. Moving on then, back on Monday in Abu Dhabi, President Lee Jae-myung hosted a dinner for members of the local Korean community, during which he referred to the United Arab Emirates as a, quote, base camp for South Korea's engagement with the wider Arab region. He pledged that South Korea and the UAE will open a new chapter of shared economic prosperity by combining their strengths in research and production and in advancing into developing markets. In other news, come December, Seoul and Washington will sit down for talks on non-tariff arenas of trade, having laid down in writing their tariff agreement late last week. Our correspondent Moon Ji-young reports.
With the focus in South Korea-U.S. trade relations now shifting to non-tariff issues that require further negotiations, Korea is gearing up for talks with the U.S. next month. Seoul's Trade Ministry announced Monday that officials plan to meet with the U.S. trade representative in December to discuss concrete implementation measures for recent trade agreements. This upcoming Joint Free Trade Agreement Committee meeting will cover various non-tariff trade barrier issues. Both sides committed to addressing non-tariff barriers affecting trade in food and agriculture products by establishing a U.S. desk dedicated to requests for U.S. horticultural products. While the Korean Agriculture Ministry called it a channel to strengthen communication, some experts point to its potential long-term implications.
While the U.S. desk could positively help resolve non-tariff barriers like inspection delays, its establishment also structurally strengthens the possibility of pressure for agricultural market opening.
The joint fact sheet also detailed significant changes in the automobile sector. South Korea agreed to eliminate the 50,000 unit cap on U.S.-made vehicles that meet safety standards, allowing them to enter the Korean market without extra modifications. The agreement includes provisions to ensure U.S. digital service companies avoid discrimination in areas such as network fees and online platform regulations. It also commits to easing cross-border data transfers for location, reinsurance, and personal information. These measures aim to align digital service rules with U.S. companies' demands, such as Google's for the export of high-definition map data. Talks are also expected to resume on the tariff-free status for generic drugs. Though the U.S. previously sought a 100% tariff, Korea secured a no-tariff deal, matching those with Japan and the EU. However, this exemption is conditional on the FTA committee agreeing on non-tariff plans, meaning potential delays if Korea doesn't present adequate easing measures. 문지영, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, North Korea has denounced the recently disclosed document drafted by South Korea and the U.S., claiming it confirms a confrontational stance toward the regime. Our correspondent Kim Bo-kyung reports.
North Korea on Tuesday slammed the recently unveiled fact sheet and joint statement of the annual defense talks, the security consultative meeting between South Korea and the U.S. Pyongyang's official response comes 4 days after the documents were released last Friday, saying such documents formalized Seoul and Washington's confrontational stance against Pyongyang. The commentary published by the North Korean Central News Agency said the regime will take countermeasures to safeguard its own sovereignty. The commentary argued how the announcements from the summit helped the North clearly see the Trump administration's stance toward the regime. Particularly, the regime said U.S. reaffirming the goal of the North's complete denuclearization shows its confrontational intent to completely deny the regime's identity and existence. Regarding the part that said South Korea and the U.S. would cooperate to implement the 2018 North Korea-U.S. joint statement made in Singapore, Pyongyang said this showed the shameless side of Washington and said that the U.S. had scrapped and nullified past agreements. On the U.S. approval for South Korea to build nuclear-powered submarines, the regime criticized the move as a grave development that destabilizes not only the military and security landscape of the Korean peninsula, but the entire Asia-Pacific region. Calling South Korea's pursuit of nuclear submarines a stepping stone for its own nuclear armament, it warned that this will inevitably trigger a nuclear domino effect and spark arms races in the region. To this, South Korea's presidential office said that the South Korean government does not have hostile intentions toward the North and that it will continue to make consistent efforts to ease tensions and restore trust between the two Koreas. The top office underlines that the security cooperation between Seoul and Washington is to strengthen security and safeguard national interests. Meanwhile, South Korea's unification ministry said Pyongyang's response is rather calibrated, as it does not mention the names of the country's leaders. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
The world's largest virtual asset exchange may be playing a crucial part in facilitating North Korea's money laundering. Our Pyongyang explains.
According to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, or ICIJ, about $900 million worth of stolen Ethereum flowed into 5 Binance accounts as part of a large-scale laundering operation. The funds are believed to come from the roughly $1.5 billion Ethereum theft carried out earlier this year at a Dubai-based exchange, making it one of the biggest crypto hacks ever recorded. Investigators say North Korea's Lazarus Group used a crypto swapping service known as Thorchain to convert the Ethereum into Bitcoin before transferring it into Binance accounts. Blockchain data from those accounts shows transaction volume surging over a 10-day period that experts believe aligns with the laundering timeline. The ICIJ examined transaction records from Binance and other exchanges with more than 20 blockchain specialists and analytic firms. Their findings indicate that Binance failed to block illicit funds tied not only to North Korea, but also to major criminal organizations around the world. The Huiwan Group, linked to large-scale scam operations in Cambodia, was also found to have deposited at least $400 million into Binance between 2024 and 2025. Others include Mexican drug cartels, Chinese fentanyl traffickers, and Russian money laundering groups. In a response, Binance said it cannot prevent deposits from being placed on the platform, but emphasized that it cooperates closely with global law enforcement agencies and takes action when suspicious activity is identified. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who headed nuclear talks with North Korea back in 2018 and 2019, believes there is virtually no way to persuade the regime to renounce its nuclear weapons program. The remarks were made at a forum in Virginia on Monday local time. He claimed there are no carrots to engage North Korea and that the number of sticks is low as well. He added that if he could do it differently, he would focus on China and deter it from using North Korea as a strategic tool. He also placed his weight behind South Korea's nuclear submarine ambitions, adding that Washington needs to ensure Seoul has sufficient defense capabilities as Pyongyang has nuclear weapons capabilities. The pace, that is, of household debt slowed in the third quarter of this year amid the presence of tougher lending regulations. But the total debt pile continues to inch closer to the 2 quadrillion won mark. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
The Bank of Korea announced on Tuesday that the total balance of household credit stood at 1,968 trillion won, roughly $1.36 trillion at the end of September. This is an increase of 14.9 trillion won from the previous quarter. While still an increase, it marks a significant slowdown from the second quarter, which saw revised growth of 25.1 trillion won. The slowdown was led by household loans, which grew by 12 trillion won. Mortgage loans increased by 11.6 trillion won, a smaller rise than the previous quarter's 14.4 trillion. The central bank attributed this to the government's debt management measures implemented on June 27th, implemented to tackle rising home prices and a limited number of mortgages being taken out.
The slowdown in the growth of other loans is attributable to credit loans switching to a decrease. And as for whether this is the effect of the policy, well, because credit loans themselves were restricted to within a borrower's annual income, you can see this as being mostly the effect of the policy.
The central bank stressed that its primary goal is not to drastically shrink the debt, but to stabilize it relative to the size of the economy.
First, I would like to state that the government and the Bank of Korea are aiming to gradually stabilize the household debt to nominal GDP ratio downwards, rather than drastically reducing the scale of household debt itself.
On that front, the BOK noted that with real GDP growing 1.7% in the third quarter, the household debt to GDP ratio is likely to fall. The bank expects this stabilizing trend for mortgage loans to continue as the effects of both the June and the additional October regulations are felt in the market. Meanwhile, sales credit, which is mostly credit card debt, rose by 3 trillion won. The BOK attributed this to increased car usage during the summer vacation season, local tax payments, and a general rebound in private consumption. However, the slowdown in total loans masks a surge in debt-fueled stock investment. While bank and other institutional loans fell, loans from securities firms and other intermediaries increased by 3.7 trillion won, about $2.5 billion, amid a bullish stock market. The central bank noted this trend may be continuing as separate October data showed. Other loans rising by 1.04 trillion won, while $955 million, partly due to stock investment demand. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Analysts in the U.S. believe the U.S. Federal Reserve will hold its key interest rate steady during its policy meeting in December. According to Yonhap News Agency earlier on this Tuesday, citing the Bank of Korea's New York office, major investment banks, including the Bank of America, are forecasting a rate freeze. However, members within the Federal Reserve appear divided with regard to their decision, with some calling for a further rate cut and others backing a rate freeze. An ongoing diplomatic dispute between Japan and China over Taiwan has even led Beijing to echo Seoul's concerns regarding Tokyo's claim over the South Korean island of Dokdo. Our Lee Seung-jae explains.
Tensions between China and Japan have intensified once again as Beijing broadened its criticism of Tokyo. In the days following Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's suggestion that military action by China against Taiwan could justify a response from Japan, China has been issuing strong rebukes.
Recently, the provocative remarks on Taiwan-related issues made by Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi have severely undermined the political foundation of China-Japan relations and made the public sentiment between the two countries deteriorate.
And now, in a rare move, Beijing has even expanded its criticism to include Japan's false territorial claims over Dokdo. At the regular briefing on Monday, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning was asked by state media to comment on the South Korean Foreign Ministry's protests last week when Seoul had launched a strong complaint against Tokyo's expansion of its territorial sovereignty expansion hall, which promotes Japan's false claim over Dokdo. The spokesperson responded by saying China has been following the reports closely, adding that Japan's recent hostile actions and rhetoric have triggered alarm, dissatisfaction, and protests from neighboring countries. She urged Japan to reflect seriously on its history of aggression, remain committed to a path of peace, and rebuild trust with Asian neighbors and the international community through concrete actions. Beijing has generally kept its distance from commenting on the Dokdo issue, but analysts interpret the criticism of Japan's hostile behavior as indirect support for South Korea. Other experts say this latest statement reflects China's effort to strengthen ties with another key neighbor in South Korea, while escalating its dispute with Japan. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council has adopted a resolution to advance a U.S. blueprint for the governance of Gaza. The 15-member council back on Monday voted 13-0 in favor of the resolution, with abstentions from Russia and China. Endorsing the Trump administration's 20-point ceasefire plan, the resolution seeks to turn the fragile truce into sustainable peace by establishing an international board to govern Gaza at least until the end of 2027. U.S. President Donald Trump, for his part, revealed in a social media post that he would chair the board and that it will include the most powerful and respected leaders worldwide.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. Starting in Poland, where the country's prime minister has said that a powerful blast on a railway line leading towards Ukraine was, quote, an unprecedented act of sabotage. The explosion on Sunday morning tore through a section of track, forcing a train to stop before reaching the damaged gap. No one was injured. Authorities say the attack is being investigated as terrorist sabotage carried out on behalf of a foreign intelligence service, as Poland has faced a growing wave of sabotage attempts in recent years. A second incident on the same route later forced another passenger train to stop after damage was found on overhead lines. Officials say the probability of foreign involvement is, quote, very high, calling this one of the most serious threats to Poland's infrastructure in recent history. The government has convened its National Security Committee and ordered inspections along the rest of the line towards the Ukrainian border. In Bangladesh, former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has been sentenced to death for crimes against humanity linked to last year's student-led protests that forced her from power. A domestic war crimes tribunal found that during the unrest, she authorized lethal force, which killed about 1,400 people. She was tried in absentia after fleeing the country. The verdict on Monday is being called a pivotal moment for the nation as families of the victims sought severe punishment. UN investigators say the killings may amount to crimes against humanity, but expressed opposition to the use of death penalty. Ukraine has signed a deal to obtain up to 100 French-made Rafale fighter jets over the next decade in a major step to strengthen its air defenses amid intensified Russian missile and drone attacks. The agreement is a political commitment, not a final purchase contract, and is expected to rely on European funding and potentially frozen Russian assets. France says the deal also includes advanced air defense systems, drones, and precision munitions to support Ukraine now and prepare for any future incursions once a peace deal is reached. Training for the advanced jets will take time, but both sides say that the long-term support is essential for rebuilding Ukraine's military. An Australian man has been sentenced to 9 days in jail after rushing at Ariana Grande at a premiere in Singapore. Prosecutors say Johnson Wen jumped a barrier at the premiere of Wicked for Good on November 13th and wrapped an arm around Ariana Grande before security intervened. Wen later bragged on Instagram, posting a video of the incident and thanking Grande, quote, for letting me jump on the yellow carpet. A judge said he had a pattern of disrupting high-profile events. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
This morning was the coldest so far this fall. The first snow was also seen in Chungcheongnam-do province today as the rain turned into snow in the cold weather. It was 9 days earlier than last year. This cold spell continued even during the day, with daytime highs topping out at single digits all over the country. The freezing temperatures will continue tomorrow morning, with Seoul plummeting to -2 degrees Celsius, which is similar to today. Temperatures will recover back to the average temperatures for this time of year from Thursday afternoon. Tomorrow morning, Chuncheon will start off at -5 degrees, Daejeon and Daegu at 0 degrees. Daily highs will rise up to 8 degrees in Seoul and Chuncheon, 9 degrees in Daejeon. As a dry weather advisory has been issued for parts of the East Coast, please take extra precautions not to cause any wildfires. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Right, those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. As always, thank you for watching.
The moment we wear it, our spirits lift. It helps us grow strong in body and in mind. As we wear it, we learn patience and respect. The belt system motivates students to strive harder and continue growing. This uniform shapes movement into grace and turns performance into something thrilling. Now, embraced around the world, Taekwondo shares our culture, philosophy, and values with pride and spirit. Though it may seem simple, this uniform holds your passion and your journey. It belongs to Taekwondo. Wear the extraordinary. Be with Taekwondo.
President Lee Jae-myung is currently on a state visit in the United Arab Emirates, where he's promoting productive partnership in trade, advanced technology, and defense. We have more on Press Perspective today. Hello, welcome to Press Perspective for this Tuesday, November 18th here in Seoul. I'm Min San-hee. Today, we touch upon President Lee Jae-myung's diplomatic agenda in the United Arab Emirates, the first leg of his four-nation 10-day tour of the Middle East and Africa. For more on this, I have freelance reporter David Lee here in the studio. David, welcome back.
Good to see you, Sunny.
I also have Shreyas Reddy with NK News live on the line. Shreyas, it's good to have you on.
Good to see you.
Right, we shall start here in the studio. David, let's begin with details of the president's agenda in the UAE. I believe he spoke to a local daily as well.
Yes, he did. Just to give a short brief of his trip to the UAE. This is the president's first trip to the Middle East and the African region as president of South Korea. And he's carrying the goal of expanding outreach to these regions. And the UAE, it's his first leg of the trip, of the 10-day trip to this region. He will spend 3 days, and he departed on Monday. And just a quick background, the UAE is the only Middle Eastern country that South Korea has a special strategic partnership, which was established in 2018. And the two countries have quite a history of having a close, relationship. They have 45 years of diplomatic ties. And according to the presidential office, the meeting happened as President Lee met with UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Gyeongju. And apparently he was invited at that time. And that's why he departed on Monday for the UAE, where he visited the National War Memorial and also the Grand Mosque, which is a tomb site of UAE's first president. First Lady Kim Hae-kyung was seen wearing a hijab. And today, like you said, he had an interview with the local paper, in the UAE. Where which happened before his summit with the UAE president. And actually, I saw a video before coming to the studio. The two heads of states were actually in a meeting, and they're set to sign a memorandum of understanding that discusses strengthening cooperation in the defense industry, AI, and other strategic sectors. So they might have just signed it while we're talking, because the meeting is happening in real time. In the interview with the local paper, he highlighted how he wanted this relationship with between South Korea and the UAE to be a sort of a new centennial phase of relationships that goes beyond these traditional cooperation in sectors like defense and AI, and even overreaching to sectors like space exploration, renewable energy. And he promised a role in developing UAE's AI semiconductor ecosystem. As we all know, South Korea has a strong foot in that sector. So, the UAE can also rely on South Korea for these matters. And I think there's a really kind of increasing bridge with the cultural sectors. The UAE is the most, as the president says, is the most important travel destination for South Koreans in the Middle East. And President Lee put out a roadmap to establish a Korean cultural center in the country by 2030. And the UAE is known to be a very big fan of K-pop and K-drama, one of the biggest in the Middle East, according to some reports. Lastly, I want to mention that the president also plans to ease entry for UAE citizens coming to South Korea, which is also caused by the tremendous popularity of K-culture in the Middle East.
Right, indeed. Now, Shreyas, as David said, this is the president's first visit to the Middle East as the head of this country. What has been the response within the media with regard to the implications of this trip to the region?
Well, I think at this point, in some ways, we're still waiting to see what comes out of it. As David mentioned, there's certainly some deals, some areas of priority, but I think there's certainly a lot of anticipation about what will come next. And a big part of it is just the fact that, as you mentioned, it is his first visit to the Middle East. But I think in some ways, the Middle East has not always been the biggest priority for South Korea. Yes, it's been an important region worldwide. And so South Korea does have relations with many of the countries there. But in some ways, a lot of this reflects President Lee's focus since he took charge on trying to strengthen South Korea's relations with countries beyond just a select few that have largely dominated its interests over the years. At the start, we saw President Lee sent special envoys to various countries and regions. At the time, the Middle East was not part of that focus, but certainly ahead of this visit, Presidential Chief of Staff Kang Hun-sik visited Saudi Arabia, visited the UAE, and a big part of it was about promoting the South Korea's interests, particularly in defense industry, sales, diplomacy. So that is something that is critical to Lee Jae-myung's interests, and we're seeing a lot of focus on collaboration in artificial intelligence, defense capabilities, and cultural exchanges. As David mentioned, there's already a big market for some of those things in the Middle East, and Lee Jae-myung has said he essentially sees UAE and perhaps the region as a base camp for South Korea to forge and strengthen its economic foothold in the region. And so what we're going to see perhaps is a lot more interest in what comes next beyond the UAE, which is already a strong base for South Korea, as it seeks to make economic inroads in the region and build up a lot more focus, a lot more cooperation in defense and key industries like AI.
Right then, David, as Shreyas has highlighted, defense cooperation is indeed on the president's diplomatic agenda, as the world witnessed a tangible surge in defense spending last year, I believe. In fact, David, could you walk us through this jump in spending with regard to defense on the global front?
Yes, so according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, the global military spending reached 2.7 trillion in 2024, and this is a 9.4% increase from 2023, which is the steepest rise of spending on security needs since the Cold War era. And the institute also went on to say that this spending is projected to reach 6.6 trillion by 2035 if the current trend of emphasizing defense needs continues. And this increase in the past few years was attributed by all corners of the world, as all regions of the world saw increases in spending. But especially there was rapid growth in Europe and in the Middle East. And just some other facts, more than 100 countries boosted their military spending in 2024. And the key spenders include U.S., China, Russia, Germany, and India, totaling 60% of the total military spending. But like I said, I think there's special emphasis on Europe and the Middle East, and it's due to some of these long-ranging conflicts that are happening in these regions. First up, Europe. All countries except Malta in Europe increased spending last year. And as we know, the war in Ukraine is has entered its third year. So the European continent, the military spending on the continent, spending rose by 17%, higher actually than the level that was seen during the height of the Cold War. And Russia is obviously at the height of this spending. Russia spends about 20% of its government spending in military needs, defense spending. Ukraine spends about 34% of its GDP in military spending. And it's not just these two countries that are, directly involved in the conflict that spend a lot. Other countries like Germany, which is kind of, with the UK, they're seen as the leader of NATO in many ways. Germany increased spending by 30%. Poland, which is a neighboring country, and has seen some interferences from the conflict, they also spent increased nearly 30% in spending, military spending, and NATO as a whole increased by 55%. Going to the Middle East, the region saw a 15% increase in spending, and this is obviously due to has a lot to do with the war in Gaza, which has entered its second year. Which has prolonged for over 2 years before the ceasefire happened last month. Israel, obviously, and Israel increased spending by 65%, while Lebanon and other countries that are also affected, they've tremendously increased spending as well. And also Asia, with the world's second largest spender in military spending, China, has really ramped up its defense spending due to the increased aggression by military juggernauts of China and Russia. Just looking at South Korea, Lee Jae-myung, he said that defense spending would rise by 8.2% next year, and that they also committed to align with U.S. standards, which was to raise defense spending to 3.5% of the country's GDP. And also includes a $25 billion investment in U.S. military equipment purchases by 2030. So all in all, I think with the Cold War ending more than 3 decades ago, and relative peace happening until the early 2000s, I think we've entered a new era of conflict that includes bipolar but also multipolar conflicts around the world. And I think that's why we're seeing tremendous increases in spending in military defense.
Right, and against this backdrop, Shreyas, quite a number of foreign media outlets have been covering South Korea's advancements as an arms exporter. What exactly, Shreyas, have they been saying?
Well, I think in many ways, a lot of the focus has been how South Korea has emerged as a powerful new player in global defense sales, particularly with its weapons export deals with Poland and UAE in recent years. It's already, I think, the second largest arms exporter to European NATO members, thanks to its vehicle and artillery supplies. And to some, this has been something of a surprise, positioning South Korea as an upstart entry into the global defense market, as one outlet put it. But others see it as part of a long-running push to become one of the world's biggest defense exporters. Lee Jae-myung has very much made it clear that he sees South Korea ascending to become the 4th biggest defense exporter in the coming years. And so the government is also seeking to increase its defense spending. And when analysts and media outlets around the world are looking at it, they say that a lot of this is down to South Korea essentially being well positioned to deliver modern systems quickly, cost-effectively, and more flexibly, thanks to its advanced industrial base as well as strong state support. And also, South Korea has essentially employed a smart diplomatic and industrial strategy, not just selling weapons, but also building long-term partnerships through technology transfer, for example, with K2 tanks that they sold to Poland. But a lot of this also at the same time, media and analysts are a little cautious. They say that South Korea has all what it takes to continue growing, but that success depends on maintaining its export momentum even after the Ukraine war ends, which has been a big driver of interest in defense imports for many of these countries. Managing the risk of helping future competitors, for example, if Poland learns how to make those tanks, they can also continue selling them. And navigating shifting geopolitics, so as the Ukraine war ends, as other conflicts shift, and perhaps, as U.S. interests in particular change, the defense market will keep shifting and its needs will keep shifting.
Shreyas, keeping in mind tensions here on the Korean Peninsula as we speak, what are your thoughts with regard to calls for a self-reliant defense posture for South Korea?
Right. Well, as mentioned, so Lee Jae-myung has very much prioritized strengthening South Korea's defense capabilities, not just the defense industry, but also the military over here. And a lot of this is framed as a matter of national pride, but at the same time, it's also a matter of prudence to avoid being entirely reliant on US forces. As Donald Trump has made it clear, the Korean Peninsula isn't necessarily his biggest priority in the region. When it comes to the US, they are keeping an eye on China. And so the role of the US forces, the role of US military deterrence in this region may eventually seek to prioritize China as a bigger issue. And so Lee Jae-myung is quite aware that you cannot always rely on US support here. And so between that and his own drive to strengthen South Korea's defense for national pride, he's been looking to introduce advanced weapon systems like AI combat robots, autonomous drones, precision-guided missiles, as part of a long-term strategy to strengthen capabilities. And of course, there are geopolitical concerns. For example, I mentioned what could happen with the US forces, which could be exacerbated even more in the case of a China-Taiwan conflict, which could require South Korea to handle its own defense if US forces get dragged into that conflict. But another factor, of course, is North Korea. While Lee Jae-myung has tried to minimize references to North Korea in his defense strengthening talk, it is the immediate threat right next to South Korea, and certainly keen to continue its own military and nuclear development no matter what happens on the southern side of the border. And Lee Jae-myung has said if peace falters on the Korean Peninsula, it doesn't just affect the people in this region, it could threaten global security. And of course, it essentially building South Korea's defense the way Lee Jae-myung sees it is also key to restoring trust and laying a foundation for future relations between the two Koreas, something North Korea, of course, would disagree with.
Right. Meanwhile, beyond national borders or the Korean Peninsula, that is, David, South Korea and the UAE, as you mentioned earlier, have a strategic partnership that covers collaboration in quite a number of fields. Keeping in mind the current climate of geopolitics, what do you suppose is the broader significance of this particular partnership?
Yeah, like I mentioned previously, the ties between the two countries go over 45 years. And this is a significant partnership in the Middle East, as Shiraz mentioned, which South Korea doesn't necessarily have close ties in that region compared to other regions in the world. So this is the President Lee's visit this week follows a state visit by former President Yoon Suk-yeol in 2023, which secured a $30 billion commitment from the UAE to South Korean energy and defense sectors. And President Lee even mentioned this during his interview with the local paper Today. And I think it's just, this kind of sums up the relationship. South Korea is one of the world's largest energy importers, and the UAE is a key supplier of crude oil. So I think this relationship allows Seoul to diversify its energy routes and suppliers, while the UAE can benefit from the resources that South Korea has with its conglomerates, and the UAE also has been one of the key purchasers of South Korean defense equipment. And I think this relationship is really a model middle power dynamic or partnership, I guess. And I'm saying middle power in the sense that the two countries are not necessarily the preeminent powers in their respective regions or play of power, but with this dynamic kind of relationship, they're able to diversify away from being too dependent on the, I guess, prevalent powers or traditional Western powers like the U.S. So it diversifies diplomatic partnerships beyond the U.S.-China rivalry, especially in today's context. And I think this is important because, as we just talked about, with the increase of defense spending across the world, these geopolitical uncertainties call for these types of relationships that are not just limited to the region, but rather they're functional partnerships that reduce vulnerabilities for both parties. And just one kind of example is one thing I wanted to point out is that President Lee, tomorrow he's poised to visit the AK unit in the UAE. And this is a military unit made up of South Korean troops in the Korea Special Warfare Unit in the country. And they train military forces in special warfare and counterterrorism operations. And the point of this military unit is to strengthen military cooperation with the UAE and also tasked with protecting Korean nationals in the region. And I think this is kind of one of the many possibilities that can arise with such partnerships. So yeah, I think it's a very important diplomatic partnership that will increase in importance in the future.
Right, for sure. And after the president's visit to that unit to boost morale, Shiraz, President Lee Jae-myung is poised to address students at Cairo University in Egypt on Thursday local time to share South Korea's initiatives in the region. Now, with regard to that particular address, Shiraz, what will you be keeping your eyes and ears on?
Well, it is, of course, primarily a university address. But I think such speeches can always offer hints as to the president's priorities and policies during such visits and for the future of relations with the region. So perhaps one thing to keep an eye out will there be any hints of specific initiatives launched to promote cooperation, particularly on key areas? And so it'll be interesting to hear how President Lee promotes Korea's main areas of focus in the region as he presents his vision for engagement. And a lot of it is likely to come along expected lines, defense cooperation, particularly defense industry deals. That's something that the presidential office has been very keen to emphasize as a focus for relations with the Middle East, but also, of course, AI, which is a central part of the current government's policies and its investment in South Korea, but also elsewhere, very much focused on that cooperation. But there'll be other areas, of course. Across the Middle East, energy security is a big priority when it comes to President Lee's agenda. And so that will also certainly be there on the trip. There will be focus on green energy as well, not just traditional energy. And in general, promoting more cultural exchanges, more people-to-people exchanges, and education. I think these are perhaps the main threads of conversation we are likely to see. And obviously, at a university, that education factor and trying to keep an eye on on shaping the image of South Korea in their minds, that is something that will be a big priority for President Lee.
Right, indeed. And we'll have details with regard to that particular speech at the University of Cairo in Egypt on Thursday local time, that would be. All right, Shiraz, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you.
And David here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you, Sunny.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching, and do join us again same time tomorrow for more panel discussion on diplomacy.
How to survive in Korea. One room. So, you're surviving in Korea if